Let me hit you with two facts that raised my eyebrows last weekend when reading newspaper. First, it was 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO that was sold for over $70 million.
That's right.
That's for a car with no air conditioning, no Bluetooth, and as far as I know, I wouldn't say that the doors sat gracefully. Nevertheless, classic cars have overperformed gold, art, even S&P 500 over the two last decades. And second is, in the last 10 years, the stock of historical cars here in Spain have more than doubled, but you can hardly see them. They are hidden in private collections, rarely driven, and more rarely restored. So I wonder why these oily and temperamental and utterly beautiful machines grasp on people that are supposed to be smart enough to leave behind the boardroom and follow the roar of the engine. I'm Jesús Valero. I'm still in finance, but with me there are a couple that have turned their lives and their move to a different kind of investment, time, passion, and craftsmanship of classic cars. Tim, recently you moved to Madrid after your whole life in finance in London, and you joined this passion of classic cars very early, at the age of 23. I guess you bought your first 911, that's it?
That's right.
And over the years, you have built a deep knowledge of the space, both as a collector and as involved in restoring and historical racing. And joining him is Mónica Lobato. She also is based in Madrid. She spent 10 years in London, and she brings a unique perspective on the classic cars world. With a background in asset management and private equity relationships, she now is involved in client engagement, in digital initiatives, and the development of events and driving tours. Mónica, yo tengo curiosidad, ¿por qué decidís dar este giro en vuestras vidas?
Como hemos comentado con anterioridad, Tim es un apasionado absoluto de los coches desde niño. Me ha contagiado su pasión y realmente yo soy española y pensamos realmente en todas las experiencias, todo lo vivido en Inglaterra, cómo lo podemos trasladar a España. Todo ese mercado que es un mercado especialmente maduro, cómo podemos trasladar todo el conocimiento, todas las aventuras, tours, experiencias que se viven en Reino Unido a España. La verdad es que la primera de las primeras veces que comentamos en trasladarnos a España es cuando por primera vez conduje yo un Jaguar E-Type. Me encantó. Fue una experiencia extraordinaria y fue así un poco como yo también me metí un poquito también en el mundo de los coches clásicos. Es verdad que nosotros pasábamos los veranos aquí en España, etcétera, etcétera, y nunca encontramos como una red de apoyo, tanto mecánico como de dónde podemos guardar los coches, qué podemos hacer con los coches. Entonces, realmente todas esas pequeñas cosas que son fundamentales para los dueños de estas obras de arte, son tan importantes que en Reino Unido se da por hecho, que obviamente existe el experto, el técnico, para ese tipo especial de coche, en España no lo encontramos. No encontramos realmente dónde podrían estar guardados nuestros coches, no encontrábamos realmente quién es el técnico que puede, también que tú confías para dejarle tu obra de arte, ¿no? Entonces decidimos venir a España, decidimos contactar con todos nuestros colaboradores internacionales para dar soporte a todos nuestros clientes que tienen coches aquí en España. Tenemos diferentes acuerdos y yo creo que coger lo bueno de Inglaterra, de todo lo que he aprendido en Inglaterra y trasladarlo aquí a España es nuestro principal objetivo.
Definitely Spain is a country with old tradition of making cars from the 50s. I think we've got like 17, 18 different plants from different makers here in Spain, but still the classic car is a niche here. So what made you base your venture here, apart from that particular situation from Mónica?
Jesus, many reasons. Mónica has explained already that she had spent 10 years in the United Kingdom. I've spent pretty much all my life in the UK. And as you said in your earlier comments, I've always had a passion for cars and specifically older cars. I mean, people have different interests in cars, but my passion was always older cars. And I was used to having a very developed and well-evolved marketplace. And in the case of the United Kingdom, and it will be similar for Germany, for the United States, for France, for Italy, there's a long history. And whilst you're absolutely right, there's a lot of production of cars here today, Spain doesn't really have that long history associated with marques, if you like. So if you think about the United Kingdom, you know, if you were to ask people the famous cars, they would say Aston Martins, Jaguars. In Germany, it would be Mercedes and Porsche. In Italy, it would be clearly Ferrari, the example of the 250 GTO. Maserati, Lamborghini. In France, it will be Bugatti, and so on and so forth. Spain doesn't really have that. And similarly, one of the things about the marketplace is it's not just about the makers of the cars. The real passion behind the marketplace is also linked particularly to motorsport. So if you think about the golden age, so-called, which is probably going back to the 20s and 30s, so pre the Second World War, and then moving on post Second World War, particularly the 50s, when Europe started to be rebuilt and we started to look for avenues for almost a release, and that one of the releases was motorsport. And during that era, we had a lot of very famous drivers. So, you know, famous Argentinian, Juan Fangio, Sterling Moss, Dan Gurney in the United States, and so on and so forth. And all of these very famous racers were very associated with certain cars. You know, whether it be the Ferraris, whether it be the Jaguar D-types, and so on and so forth. None of that really existed in Spain. So when Mónica and I were thinking about an idea, because we always had this passion, our view was Spain was underserved. Mm-hmm. There was lots of interest, actually. You know, in recent years, people in Spain have become very interested in cars. Obviously, Formula One, you know, there's a race in Catalonia, soon to be one here in Madrid. Lots of people are very interested, but there's not really a lot of support here. So there isn't support in terms of events. There isn't support in terms of people to help collectors build the collections, maintain the collections. And that has served as actually a bit of a disincentive, I think. So, you know, when we were looking at this and when we decided to come here in early 25 to set up this particular venture, we saw a big opportunity. But I think there's other things that go in with this, and this is about the country itself. This is again, I come from the UK. The UK, bluntly, is a terrible country. It rains all the time. The roads are congested. You know, it's very difficult to enjoy your cars. It's the contrary in Spain. You know, you have lovely roads, very diverse country, you know, north to south is very different. And we saw there was a real opportunity for, not only for the owners of the cars, but actually for the population to really enjoy seeing these pieces of art, these pieces of culture. And I'll just give you a story and then I'll shut up. We were recently taking some of our own cars out. One is a 1969 Ferrari. The other one is a 1963 Ferrari E-Type. And we arrived at the place and we were literally mobbed by people wanting to photograph the cars, wanting to learn about the cars. And this is including very young people. You know, when was this car built? What's the history of the car? Really wanting to understand the history behind these cars. And I think that's a really important part of it.
So you said that probably Spain right now is not a benchmark for this kind of business.
Yes.
But what are the current situation, the current trends for the classic cars business around the world, particularly in Europe? And how are you planning to bring that into Spain?
Yeah. So look, I've touched on a few of these points, but the situation is the classic car market in many countries around the world is well established. I mean, just to give you an idea in terms of some of the headlines, if you like, the market today is worth about $30 billion. And what that means is all of the economic generation around this industry is a very important driver. And that's everything from people who are selling the cars, maintaining the cars, all the events, the racing that goes around it. But it's very concentrated in a number of areas, and I think it's important to understand those. The first is, from a geography perspective, the largest market in the world is the United States. Very well established. Clearly, it's a large country. Economically, it's very strong, and it's really driven, if you like, by the baby boomers. Mm-hmm. So people who are now in their sort of 60s, maybe 70s, who've been fortunate enough to learn to appreciate these cars, have enough money to be able to buy the cars. And you see similar things, as I mentioned, because of the strength of the history, the brands, the sort of history of, particularly associated with motor racing in places like the UK, France, Germany, Italy, those sort of countries. And all of those countries have developed a huge amount of support to really foster the interest. So, you know, today, many of those historic races, you know, everyone has heard of things like the Le Mans 24 Hours, the Mille Miglia in Italy, you know, some of the famous races that went on in the United Kingdom. Many of those have been recreated to feature classic cars. So, you know, in the UK, we have the Goodwood Revival, which is every September. It's themed to be in period, if you like. So it's the whole event is made to feel like it's in the 50s and 60s. All of the cars raced are from those sort of eras, including 250 GTOs. So, you know, you will see those actually on the circuit. And the same would be true today with the Le Mans. There's two Le Mans. There's the Endurance 24 Hours, which is running in June of this year, every year. But there also is a Le Mans Classic, which is runs a week later. And again, it's designated only for classic cars. So in fact, in 2016, I competed in the Le Mans Classic in a racing Jaguar E-Type. Really? It was probably one of the most terrifying events I think I've ever been involved in.
But are you going to drive yourself?
Yes, of course. Yes.
And you, Monica?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well.
So we still see a very large market. The forecasts, interestingly, in the next 10 years are that the market will double. So, you know, that 30 billion I talked about, by 2034, the projections are that will be around 60 billion. Why is that? There's a number of things. New geographic markets, and I'm hoping Spain will contribute to that growth. But clearly places like Asia, China, India, Middle East is a very important place where people are starting to appreciate older cars. But also I think you're seeing demographic shift. And today I'd say most of the cars are owned by older people or by people who are fortunate enough that their parents were also interested. So in the case of our daughter Matilda, you know, she's obviously going to be a very big enthusiast in cars, I suspect, in the future, because she has no choice. She has to listen to us talking about them all the time. So you do find people whose parents were very interested in them, who are getting into them. But the other theme that we are seeing is younger people who are fortunate enough to buy these types of cars. So successful professionals, entrepreneurs, who maybe are only in their early 40s now, are looking for a different type of car. Because we always say that the sort of cars that you would yearn to own in the future are the ones that you probably remember as a child.
Following your argument, isn't it that most of these cars are those that were aspirational for those baby boomers, the cars that they saw running in the roads and they wanted, but they couldn't afford them, and now that they got the money,
yes,
they buy these cars. And I was wondering, what's going to happen over the next years? What are going to be the Ferrari GTO in 20 years' time?
Yes.
Which of present cars are going to get that status?
Yeah. It's a really, really interesting debate, and it's one that we actually have a lot with people here in Spain, because different people are at different points in the journey of learning about classic cars, developing their knowledge, refining what they like, actually. So to give you an example, what is iconic? Iconic is clearly linked to these historic events that I talked about. It's very linked to rarity. So one of the reasons a 250 GTO is worth today $70 million is because only 39 of them were ever made. And that scarcity value, together with the recognition of it was associated with motor racing in that golden age, if you like, makes it very valuable. But, to give you other examples, the Ferrari F40, which was built in 1987, 1,300 of them were made. And there's no question that for people in their 40s and 50s, they will remember the F40 when they were kids. They will remember that maybe on their wall, bedroom wall. Those cars in probably the last 5-10 years, whilst they were recognized as a very collectible car, have suddenly accelerated in, if you like, their status as iconic cars. And what we're seeing is the older cars are not diminishing. They will always be highly regarded, but we're seeing new things added. So, you know, even in 2010, we're now starting to see an explosion, for example, of people wanting to collect cars with manual gearboxes, because around that time, most of the supercars became semi-automatic, but they still made a small number with manual gearboxes. So Lamborghini, Countachs, Murciélagos, these sort of cars have suddenly become very interesting to collectors. And one of the fascinating things about the market is everyone, a little bit like, you know, financial markets, is always trying to find the next source of value creation. And that's also quite a fascinating part of what we do, really.
There is something that amazes me when I talk to a classic car fan like both of you. It's how you move from the concept of investment to personal memories,
Yes.
stories attached to a precise car or whatever. And I think that probably it's because as a piece of art and the technology inside that car and the utility in the car in a precise moment, it represents or it serves like an archive of a period. Do you agree with that? Do you think that we can base future history on the history of cars?
I do, and I think we've covered in quite a lot of detail the sort of external historic associations with cars and why certain cars have become very important as a result of that. But I think what you're talking about is also the personal associations. So one of the things certainly I love about collecting cars is learning about each of the car's own history. And, you know, if we take our own cars, they are definitely not locked away in museums, if you like. They actually get used because we love using them, but we also love other people appreciating and enjoying seeing them on the roads. But you're absolutely right, Jesus. You know, I can think of any one of a number of the cars and we can talk about amazing journeys we've been on or changes in your life or wonderful events that you've taken them to. And, you know, it's sort of interesting. You'll hear car collectors obsessing actually about history files. Mm-hmm. And history files are an assortment of things from, you know, dating back in some cases when the car was first manufactured, all the different owners, perhaps moved countries through the years, you know, maybe restored numerous times along the way, you know, beautiful photographs and maybe young families being brought up in them. And to me, that's really important. There is an asset class dimension to this, but the stories behind the cars are really important. I've got, I don't know if you can see these two here. These are two models. They're actually the same car. This is a 1973 Porsche 2.7 RS lightweight. There are only 200 of them ever made. And funnily enough, when Porsche released this particular model, the main reason they released it was because they wanted to homologate this car for motor racing. And they said in those days the rules were you had to homologate 500 cars. The Porsche sales and marketing team said we would be amazed if you could sell 500 of these. There's not going to be the demand. So anyway, they released the car at, I can't remember if it was the Geneva Motor Show, one of the big motor shows in Europe. And all 500 were sold immediately. So they then went on to produce some more, and they finally produced 1,580 2.7 RSs, but only 200 of the lightweight variants. Now, the reason I mention this car is I bought this car in 2010 in Germany. It had been recently restored by a very, very well accomplished German restorer, but it didn't have much history to the car other than the chassis number, the motor, the gearbox, all these sort of things. So for the next 5 years, we researched what this car had done. And somewhat by chance, we determined that it actually had been a very successful race car in rallies in Italy. And through its professional life, it raced in 2 liveries. This one on my right is the so-called Gulf livery, because Gulf was a big sponsor in those days. This other one was Padova, which is another sponsor. And we actually travelled to Italy to meet one of the drivers, a man called Robin, who you can see is here actually. He was in his 80s, and he brought out his scrapbooks of this car when it was in this livery, and then this car when it was in this livery, and told us the story. And we literally built a book around this one car. And this is not unique. I mean, maybe some people watching this will say this is a little bit too far, but that really brings to life how much history these cars have.
We were talking about a couple of milestones in your journey into classic cars. First one is that 23 years old buying a Porsche 911.
Not quite this one, but...
I knew that. In fact, you started at the age of 14, just washing cars.
I did, yes.
And then we've got the last milestone. You mentioned that 2010 fortune to buy that car. But is there any precise moment in your history, or is a particular model that changed your mind from being a collector to being someone involved in history, involved in restoring, involved in this more emotional part of the...
Yeah, I think the turning point was probably around this time, actually. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be able to start buying more important cars. You know, at the same sort of time I started getting involved in historic motor racing as well, which also has a big historic component in terms of the history of many of the cars that race today. And, you know, you start reading more. You know, at home we have huge numbers of books on specific cars, specific models, and you just build in. And then, you know, probably what followed was more interest in restoring cars. So we've restored a number of quite important cars, including a 250 GTB Lusso, which was really interesting because, again, as you strip the cars down, you see history exposing itself. You know, the color, what was it underneath the paint that you thought it was? You know, so there's lots of different components. So I became more interested in it. And when I think today, you know, the real passion for me is still the cars that we've had the journeys with.
Mónica, esa es una parte muy interesante, porque efectivamente cuando pensamos en un cuadro, ya sé que tiene otros cuidados, ¿no? Pero parece que basta con colgarlo en el salón y ya está. Sin embargo, un coche no es así. Un coche necesitas un espacio, necesitas un mantenimiento anual y si quieres disfrutarlo, tendrás que lucirlo, tendrás que llevarlo a algún sitio. ¿Esto cómo lo estáis gestionando?
Fantástica pregunta. Y hace referencia al punto primero que has comentado, que es verdad que ahora en España hay más colecciones de coche, pero a lo mejor no se ven, ¿no?, por la calle. Y es el punto principal que nosotros queremos cambiar también. Los coches, algunos de ellos son muy atractivos como inversión, pero los coches están para disfrutarlos. Y también hay que saber cómo disfrutarlos, ¿cierto? Cuando tú eres propietario de una pieza de arte como esta y la sacas a la calle, siempre quieres tener la seguridad de dónde lo vas a dejar, cómo va a estar, qué va a suceder. O sea, quieres tener cuanta menos incertidumbre, mejor. Y luego quieres compartir esta pasión. Quieres compartir esta pasión con tu familia, con tus amigos, con personas que comparten la misma pasión, ¿no? Entonces nosotros, uno de nuestros objetivos es que nuestros clientes coleccionistas disfruten sus coches, saquen sus coches. Nosotros organizamos eventos bastante exclusivos, o sea, no queremos algo que sea para, no sé, 50 personas. O sea, estamos buscando hacer eventos de entre 5 o 6 coches, algo exclusivo, pero algo que realmente siempre recuerdes. Y eso es el coche, realmente. Tú, cuando vayan a pasar los años, lo que realmente vas a recordar son las experiencias que has obtenido con estos coches. He oído tantas historias de coleccionistas que tienen sus coches dentro de los garajes protegidos, que eso es precioso, puedes ir a verlo, pero el objetivo es utilizarlos. El objetivo es crear esas experiencias. Y ya hablaremos más adelante, pero estas experiencias están ligadas al género femenino también. O sea, tenemos que, con nuestros hijos, con nuestros amigos, o sea, tenemos que realmente compartir esta pasión. Y infectar a todos, ¿no?, un poco con nuestra pasión. Nosotros también en Clásicos Iberia, o sea, uno de nuestros principales objetivos son los jóvenes, y los jóvenes porque son las personas que van a preservar estas joyas. Son los responsables y únicos que dentro de 60 años se siga hablando de un Ferrari Daytona. Nosotros también queremos evolucionar con nuestros clientes. Habrá coches icónicos que han sido icónicos hace 20 años, pero se están creando ahora mismo también esos coches icónicos del futuro.
Mónica, Tim, thank you very much for reminding us that passion is not just only that you write in a cover letter, but it's something to drive, to build, something that sometimes leaks a little bit of oil in the garage.
Very often.
But still makes your heart beats whenever it starts. Best of luck in your business.
Thank you very much.
I hope we will see, we will watch you growing in this classic car business, and hopefully we will drive also with you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Jesus,
very
thank
much.
you so much. Thank you very much.